One of my flaws.
All right.
One
Well,
of my own flaws. Yeah.
I'll just say that we've called the meeting to order and everyone is in attendance on the committee. April Moran is absent for the evening. And we have other visitors, Jane Creed and also Jude, look,
LVDAO.
okay, thank you, Jude Ludlow. Okay, very good. So we're gonna the minutes and I just note that my name is Sheila. It's often misspelled, but
What is it?
Sheila.
Oh, okay.
Does anybody else have any comments on the minutes? I'd have a motion to approve.
Second.
Okay, Will and Michael seconded. Okay, any other comments? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Very good. All right, so it's opportunity for the public for public comment. I think Jude said you would like to speak with us,
I'd
please.
love to. I'll try not to torture you. I had to write it down so I don't
Go ahead.
often forget. I'll try to be quick. So yes, I am Jude Lovell from 542 Browns Road here in Mansfield. For those of you that don't know me. My interest in housing really began in the 1980s when I built my own prototype log frame cabin, which became a Christmas tree farm, a sales shed, and that was a prototype for a cape that I built, and that was in Southbury. I was also part of a condo project while I lived in Maine and designed my unit and helped others design theirs. That was an interior, the exterior was already set. And most recently, my partner and I, Mike Moran, built a reproduction colonial here in Mansfield.
Yeah.
Mike's been a builder for close to 50 years in town. With our own aging concerns and then concerns around our sons who are young adults who couldn't afford homes in Boston and recently the Tacoma area, and a nephew that's actually built several tiny homes for various people in Vermont and California, my interest got really renewed in housing stock. I also worked for the Hartford AARP account. And as a strategic direction team member and director of project management, we had something the gerontology department developed called the Hartford House, which traveled around the nation. And it was more focused on interior levers and designs and that sort of thing. So my fascination, I guess, with housing has been long going on. I do want to congratulate all of you on forming this committee and also for those of you that volunteer, because I know the time and effort and commitment that takes. I did review the minutes from your last meeting, the first meeting, I guess. Just two quick points. One, whoever was doing the demographic data collection, I wanted to ensure that you do keep these students that are housed at UConn sort of a separate statistic within that. And also that you look at future projections, not just current aging, but what it's going to look like in the next 5-10 years, et cetera. I also urge you strongly to not only look at towns in Connecticut, but nationally. There's been a tremendous amount of development progress outside of Connecticut, more in the California, Washington, New Hampshire areas. Connecticut, in fact, is really lagging behind in their regulations and approach. And I think we've seen several articles getting at that, op-eds in the papers recently. I understand that focus and your greatest concern probably has been, as much of the other committees has been, around the Four Corners university housing situation. And I hope we have a representative somewhere on the team here. I saw there was some UConn backgrounds that can speak to that in terms of what the current plans are and if there's any changes in plans, and keep this group up to speed, because that was a little mystery for all of us. I feel that a lot of the focus that I've read about in the papers and so forth has been upon apartment complexes and also meeting the 10% low income standard. And I really hope you don't miss something called middle housing. And that's not middle income housing, but middle housing. It's a really critical link that, as you'll read these, I hope read these informational pamphlets that I got. It's really been a problem since the 1940s when we moved towards the single house only perspective. I've done a lot of research starting with my old contacts at the gerontology department, and really started it because I was looking at ideas for Michael and I's next project, which instead of traditional colonial is going to be focused more on a duplex kind of an issue, and was looking for information on interior design sorts of things to help them along. I think this is probably the most informational publication that AARP did. I don't know whether you've
Okay.
gotten that yet or not. And also, and that's called the Missing Middle, Discovering and Developing Missing Middle Housing. Also, the ABCs of ADUs is a fascinating publication, and ARP does it in a very nice, clean, simple bullet point way, so it's an easy read. And then Making Room, Housing for a Changing America. Those were 3 of the 5 pamphlets that I got. I'm going to hang on to them. But Jen, I'm not sure who can order these, but they're free. And I can't, as an individual, order more than 1 copy, but as a commission, you can order copies for all the members.
Yeah, I can, and many of them are linked online, or I know at least the ABCs of ADUs are. So
Right.
if maybe you could send me an email with the
Form
links.
and the link.
Yeah,
It's a form you have to fill out. and
Yeah,
sign.
if you send that to me, I'll, yeah.
Absolutely.
But they're virtually on the AARP
That
website.
I know that the
Yes.
ABCs of ADUs
Okay.
are, because I've
Yeah.
looked at that, and I'm very familiar with the missing middle housing movement. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, because that obviously covers, as you know, the townhouses, the ADUs, the
Yeah.
duplexes, the cottage
Yep.
courtyards and so forth, and really is the continuum between this single house and the large apartment complex. So, and the interesting thing is that it's really not just about the elderly. It's about single moms and dads, entry-level young adults, empty nesters, all types of households, all types of income levels, all types of employment situations and stages of life. And they make that real clear in the publications. I personally tried to go through the several hundred pages of P&Z regulations when we were building our house. And I think that was before you even made major modifications to them. And notice that there was a lot of focus on single family houses, minimum square footages, et cetera, that will not apply to these kinds of developments. For example, the 3 things that strike me as problematic currently, and will be obviously for this kind of development, is the concept of owner occupancy. And I know that some courts have found this discriminatory, and you can rent out a single family house. So why do you have to be owner occupied if you have a duplex or another, ADU kind of a component? And it's been driven in the courts in terms of, can you really dictate where somebody lives? Can you force somebody that they have to live at a certain location? The definition of family, which I know had to be a huge struggle in this environment to even come up with, again, has faced legal challenges, and so especially with all kinds of people living together, whether it's exchange students or you give your heart out to a Ukrainian refugee or whoever. So you really have a lot of lawsuits and a lot of questioning by civil liberties. And I think that's something to really consider in terms of modification. And the last point was related to attempts to make landlords be in-state. And the reason that's of a concern to me is because I know some out-of-state landlords who are fantastic, who have a management firm come in the minute the heat goes off of there. Others are horrendous, and would have a slum and not care about it. And it seems that rather than a P&Z regulation, that should be a health code regulation. Are you causing a nuisance? Are there water, septic, trash issues? So those are just 3 of the thoughts that I came up with as I reviewed the information briefly. And I really hope that there will be changes made to to specifically address middle housing in a positive, proactive view. And lastly, related to the wonderful trust fund that you've developed, I do hope that you consider the development perhaps of some model housing examples so that people can actually see and feel what that looks like. And perhaps some of the grants and loans could be directed towards local contractors and builders that really suffer from developing, given the current costs of building single family homes, the permitting, the supply issues, and so forth, and versus just large developers. And I know that's a bias, obviously, having Michael being a general contractor, but it really seems that we could benefit from that, and that several of those people would be, I'm sure, more than willing to open the houses to a kind of open house view it scenario. So that's all that I had, and I'm sure it was
Thank you.
more than you needed to know, but I probably already did know. But I
think-
appreciate your efforts and having me. Be
Thank
able to speak.
you. Please come again. Jude. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for the references too.
Yeah.
So we're going to be looking at middle housing here at some point.
Yes,
The concept
exactly.
and-
So, and so there is, and maybe Jude, you're familiar, the whole Desegregate Connecticut movement, or it's basically an organization now, and they are kind of right on top of all of these issues.
Mhm.
And I'm happy to have I mean, if Sheila, if you think this is a appropriate time, I can talk a little bit about, what we did in terms of ADUs and the struggle that a university town has with the
Mhm.
owner occupancy and the definition of family, and trying to really thread that needle of not having a two family as of right, which on the surface may not seem like a bad thing, but we just have so many investor landlords, and so this is not a perfect solution by any stretch of the imagination, but it's sort of been one way that we try to keep just the conversion of single family homes into rentals.
Right.
It just adds a barrier. And the definition of family is a challenge. It's very difficult to enforce. However, that's one of the reasons why we have that is because of the incentive, the amazing and incredible incentive to convert single family homes in this town to student
The
rentals.
hottest market in this town is for student housing.
Right. And I mean, if you just
That
follow
just really blanks out any other market, frankly.
I was on, someone had mentioned the Mansfield Connections. I usually stay off of that site and Facebook altogether, but there's a 2-bedroom house listed for $3,000, and that's not unusual. My daughter lives, I think I've told you, Upper West Side, Manhattan, in a nice apartment. It's not luxury. It doesn't have granite. Well, it does have granite countertops, but it is a 5th floor walk up, and she's paying $1,350, and she's 2 blocks from Central Park. So
Yeah, so I think for this committee, what we're going to stay very focused on is affordable housing for the people that work in the town and can't live here because of cost, having different, as you had mentioned, different types of housing, and for people for seniors who are on fixed income, for families who really can't afford, maybe they're 60% of the median income, even though they're both working. So that's going to be our focus, and it does overlap with zoning and other issues, but we're going to try to keep very, very focused.
Yeah, I do think, just to kind of, you use the word barrier, and I do think when we use language around, it is barriers, but that creates barriers to affordable housing, because we're putting restrictions on property. And I guess that because I'm a fan of like all of this, but I think as I was reading more, kind of that language, when you really get down into the nitty gritty, if by the town creating that language in those zoning laws, it has put up barriers and created some that also limits affordable housing in so many ways. Because middle income people, I think part of what we want to help is support folks to stay here too. So if you graduate UConn,
Yeah.
you are
we
going
want
to
you to
be,
stay. Yeah.
you are going to be renting with 2 or 3 friends, right? So,
Right.
and it is, I think, discriminatory to
Mhm.
say a landlord can't have a property be for students if that's what they choose their property to
Let me
be.
just say, what we'll need to focus, I think, at a future meeting is let's focus we wanted to focus on zoning. We said that at the last meeting.
Yeah.
And we want to look at zoning regulations in terms of how they are an asset, how they are not an asset, what may need change, both understanding the implications of change. So that, what's the saying, so that the perfect is not the enemy of the good. Is that what it is?
Yeah, I think also, it falls into the health and safety. I mean, you have certainly many students who are very responsible And they're very good tenants. And so I think to block them out of saying you can't have 3 or 4 of you, together, even though you're not related.
Yeah, we're not gonna get there. We're not gonna go there because I'm gonna try to,
I
because
see.
it'll distract us from looking at how do we get more affordable housing in this community?
Mhm.
And how do we do it in a way that it really gets to the people,
That
who
we
need
want
it.
to.
And so let me move us on to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So Kylie has a presentation that she's gonna give us. What we certainly learned, Kylie and I working on this over the last couple of weeks, is that almost no one in the state has an Affordable Housing Trust Fund. It's the towns that we've identified so far. 3 are in Fairfield County, Fairfield, Greenwich, Darien, and we just learned about Darien, and Mansfield. And from the sound of it, Mansfield and the way that Mansfield has set this up is really ahead of the game. In terms of how we're going to fund it. In Greenwich, for example, they were totally opposed to funding it except by contributions. And their only asset is that they have somebody on their Planning and Zoning Commission who is professionally works for a national firm that does affordable housing. So he's talked to us a lot about how you use the fund to leverage. But let's get into the basics of what this is. Kylie's gonna present a PowerPoint and then we can discuss it.
Yeah, so let me get this up.
So I was just wanted to, in case Kylie is an MPA student, is it MPP or MPA, Kylie?
I'm an MPP, so I'm earning my master's in public policy from UConn right now, actually. So I can definitely speak to the student perspective of what it's like to be renting in this town the last few years.
So Kylie works for the town. She's working out of the town manager's office. She's doing some work on some communication initiatives, but she's also been assigned to this committee in particular and to affordable housing issues. So she's a great resource and we're hoping that, she can do a lot of research for us. So.
Mhm.
Don't worry, it's my specialty. So let me get this all pulled up. I don't know why it's there we go. Yeah, so like Sheila was saying, her and I both been looking into affordable housing for other towns. And the 2 that we chose to look into specifically were Stamford and Fairfield, because like she was mentioned before, unfortunately, Greenwich doesn't fully have a plan in place since there is a lot of opposition within that town, and they're very lucky to have the person that they do. So it's a bit unfortunate what they're dealing with. But what I went on to review for this was I was looking over the applications, both the criteria that they use to evaluate and also some examples. And I also looked into the Housing Trust Fund statutes and how they relate to their zoning regulations. And lastly, how they contribute to the trust fund. So when it comes to applications, they have pretty similar application criteria. So Stanford specifically looks at the readiness, what is the completion timeline, do they have the land, what's the status, the affordability of the units, is it new construction or is it a rehabilitation, the amenities and services that are provided, what's the unit size and what's the type, where the neighborhood is and the proximity to transit, which is also, side note, a really wonderful thing to look into when you're looking into affordable housing. Other financing sources that they're using. Is it going to be a home ownership or rental? The target population and also their expertise on the matter. Whereas Fairfield looks into what the applicant, what they've done before and what they can handle. Once again, the project readiness, what's their financial feasibility, the reasonableness of project costs, because you don't want to spend a ton on a project that's meant for affordable housing, especially since it is pulling from trust funds. The degree at which they're also being utilized, the consistency with the community goals and the funding priorities, degree of affordability, and also is there written support for the project. So that's what they've looked into for each of them. And I both have examples of their forms. In Fairfield, we were lucky enough to have an example of the application. It is a very long application since they do have a lot of supporting documents. But I'll pull up Stanford's right now perfect. So it's pretty simple. Both of them are only about 5 or 6 pages. It just asks for the very basics from it. So it's asking what the title is, who is applying. Once again, was a project and program description.
Kylie, sorry, we're not seeing your screen.
What? Ah, that's frustrating. Here. Oh, I have to click on new share. That's frustrating. I thought it just moved on over.
Oh,
There we go. Do you see it now?
yes, we do. Yeah.
Okay, I'm so sorry about that. So, yes, both of them are only about 5 to 6 pages and they both contain very similar material where it's just asking who is applying, what, all the contact information and what you're requesting and a bit more about it. So theirs is pretty simple. It's just a little checkbox. So it's anything from making an affordable rental to you're trying to rehab a place to you're trying to create home ownership assistance program. So, and that goes into what's a proposed activity and then what the affordability levels are, which is very important. So we know between, typically it's known as the 60, 80 and 120. So 60 is, oh, the names are slipping from me. Sheila, do you remember what the names are?
Well,
Where
it's 60% of the state median income.
Yeah,
So each of these columns, they want to know who are you going to rent to? Some of them are, anybody that's doing an affordable housing development is going to have market level rents in order to just afford to build it. But you're gonna want to know what percentage are 60%, what percentage or 80%, whatever the guidelines that you set. It could be 50%. We would set the guidelines of what percentage of the average median income would we want to see our money being leveraged to help support. Does that
yeah.
make sense?
Yes, I was trying to remember what the names of it was. Like the 60% is
No.
it work
Look,
or the 120 is workforce?
60% is
Oh, I
generally
see what you're saying.
low income.
Yes,
80% of area median income is an affordable housing unit, and then generally a workforce unit is 120% of area median income.
those were the names I was looking for. They completely slipped my mind. So thank you for that. So yes, it just goes over, how you purchase the land, what the need is. So these applications have a lot of really wonderful material and then what the neighborhood factors are, performance measures. And then going back to Fairfield, let's pull Fairfield. Let me do this. Okay.
Just a note, while she's
No.
looking at Fairfield, that Stanford was looking at people at very low income levels.
Yes.
And we would have to decide what our priorities are and what we're going to look to, how we're going to look to leverage these funds.
Yes. And then once again, this is pretty similar in how they do it. Mark Barnhart is an amazing resource that we have luckily been able to tap into. He is honestly a guru when it comes to all this. And so like they have their limits and then they update it for 2021 and what's considered a fair rent market and what the limits should be when it comes to, like we were mentioning before, the 60-80%, which is low to affordable. So they go over their review criteria and then it goes into their application. It's formatted very similarly to Stanford. And one thing that I do like is that they mention between if it's a for-profit organization that's making it or a nonprofit. Once again, the experience that they mentioned prior in their criteria, what some of the property information is, what's the proposal. So they have a lot of really great information in both of these. And then I also want to just very quickly show the application that they were able to here. So this was a example application that was sent in by Harbor Townhomes, which was them trying to build a 29 unit multifamily rental development over on Black Rock Turnpike, which if you haven't been over in the Fairfield area is one of the main roads down there. It's close to a lot of businesses. It would be a really good spot to put it. And if you also notice, it is 149 pages because they included a ton of supplemental documents. So we definitely don't have to go through this, but this is just an example of what one would look like. They could possibly be that big. For sanity's sakes, I hope that they're not all that big, but it's always really wonderful to have a ton of information rather than be lacking. So let me go pull everything back up, back over to presentation.
Mansfield have an application like this?
We don't yet.
No,
That's one of your charges.
Right.
That'd be good if we could read these.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, so you're gonna have access to all of this. I'm gonna send out this presentation afterwards to everyone so that you have access to all these links.
So I had a question for both of you, and I think it started when you showed that form application. Do
Yes.
they go to zoning before? Is that typically how, like I saw in that one you just showed us, that they actually do the approval from zoning?
Yes, so when it comes to Fairfield, they do request, I believe, that you go to zoning prior.
I would,
think you'd want to have an
Yes.
approved project, like
Yeah.
you want to know that they've done,
The due diligence.
wetlands, all of that.
Yeah.
so they're gonna have to have their basic financing in place.
Yeah,
And this is,
I would hope so before you send in 149 pages.
helps push the project to fruition.
and most times they can't get their financing until they have the local approvals.
And just also to note that what was interesting to me is that the towns sometimes do this in the form of a loan. One did it in form of a 0% loan, another in terms of 1% loan. So it's a loan against the property. They're not really looking to make money from this. But if the property is ever sold or the money then comes back to the trust fund. And I think they also have requirements for how many years the property would be, these would be deed restricted, which might, tie in with what the other sources of funding are too.
All right. So I'm gonna go on to the housing trust funds, which is also a big priority. So they have different forms of contribution. I'm also in these next parts going to mention how Mansfield does it, since of course we don't have an application live and we also don't have any applications coming in. So I couldn't use us as an example. But for right now, I'm going to show Stanford and Fairfield. So Stanford, the way that they contribute to their fund is that they have something called commercial linkage fees, which is pretty much just a percentage of the building permit fees. And they also have fee in lieu payments as a part of their Cities Below Market program. And that program requires that all new residential developments with over 10 units has to set aside 10% of them as permanent affordable housing units. And only under certain circumstances, and they do have to get a special permit approval, developers can make a fee in lieu payment instead providing the affordable units on site. Whereas with Fairfield, they're funded through supplemental inclusionary zoning fee, which is pretty much just $5 for every $1,000 of construction value. So this has generated them over $2 million since they enacted it. I believe it was back in 2018. No, it might have been 2014. It was back because Mark sent me a couple different things and they had those two dates on them. But pretty much they've made over $2 million just from having this $5 fee for every $1,000. But they also use building department fees, they get grants and loans, and they've also used some of their ARPA money, which is the American Rescue Plan money, to donate into this trust fund. So when it comes to Mansfield, the way that we're looking to do it is having fee in lieu payments as a part of our inclusionary zoning regulations, and also something known as a density bonus, which is having extra units on there, you get more bonuses from it. So ours would be 10 units per acre, and then the maximum bonus available is for 5 dwelling units per acre. The chart is right here that you can take a quick look at, and Jen also can explain the chart a little bit better than I can.
You want to talk about this, Jen, in terms of the contribution that developers make? If there's a simple way to.
Sure, I mean, just the way this a little bit of a degree in calculus if you're gonna like read our regulations and understand them. But we do have an example of how this played out, and that is with the standard at Four Corners and the Planning and Zoning Commission. So if you come in with a development of over 5 units, whether that's a subdivision, whether it's in a multifamily apartment complex, you have to set aside 10% of your units as affordable, or you have to give us a fee in lieu. Planning and zoning has been very direct, and whether you give the fee in lieu or you do the set aside is at the discretion of the Planning and Zoning Commission. The developer would really have to make an argument to do this fee in lieu. Planning and zoning has said that we want the units on site, because you'll see from the standard, they did do their 10% on site. And then they requested a density bonus. And so I can send you every developer has to do first they have to have an affordable housing plan. And that's what talks about the makeup of the units. And it justifies how they're going to do that set aside. And then they have to do the calculations for what they're proposing for this fee in lieu. And basically, the way the standard did it was they got a density bonus, and it came up to 2.9%. And then you go through it's hard to see, but the calculation is based on the International Building Code at the time of the zoning permit application. So when the standard got approval, they said, we're going to give you $1.5 million for your fee in lieu. Since then, they had to use the most current International Building Code valuation, and that went up to 1.7. So that's how we got to that 1.7. So it's really something I have to kind of read and kind of walk you through, but what they submitted as part of their application is how they got to those numbers. In any application such as this, we always hire experts, and the applicant has to pay for those experts. So when the standard came in, we hired a technical consultant that specialized in affordable housing to review their plan. And so this was not just the developer giving us some calculations. We had an expert that was reported to the Planning and Zoning Commission that they had vetted previously, review this and make comments. So any application there's probably 3 or 4 iterations of a number of things that go back and forth. And this was part of that.
So it's pretty dramatic that just on the first development in town, now that the Housing Trust Fund has been established, that it's been funded with $1.7 million. So we have a funded trust fund.
Yes.
And if there are other, and I assume there may be other developments, we're going to see quite a bit more. Which is why this is so important for us.
So is this method for contributions for Mansfield fixed? Are we going to be looking at that, or?
So that is something that I have
We will be looking.
our zoning consultants working on, is to do a draft regulation that will be referred out to this committee. And I'm hoping to get that done sooner to see. Mainly, I'd like to see if we can have the set aside be, but we'll also have to look at these percentages as well for the fee in lieu. But just to move the needle right now, it's a 10% set aside, and we will never get caught up if we just continue to require a 10% set aside. There is a fine line of, you don't want to kill a project.
Right.
But so that is where that it can be very challenging. So it's very costly to build this. $1.7 million is basically 4 units of affordable housing at the most, I would say.
Wow.
So yeah, so $1.7 million, while it's a lot,
Feels like a lot.
It's not a
Really.
lot.
Yeah.
it's not a lot.
No, no.
It's not a lot, yeah.
As to what they're making, no, it's not a lot.
Right. However, yeah, that, it's got, the money has to come from somewhere. So it also can drive up the rates of the market rate units, you know what I mean? So it's finding, I'm not an economist, I'm not a developer, but it is finding that sweet spot, which is, it's
Right.
it's not straightforward.
Yes,
I think I have a rudimentary question about density bonus.
Yeah, I hope I can answer it.
I guess I don't understand. So So it says gross density, so you could have 4 units per acre.
Yeah,
So that means you could have 8 units on 2 acres.
So-
Is this-
so
am I
say
understanding
the
this?
density is there, that I did not print, see, this is why I love remote meetings, so I could Google the zoning regulations, but if you look at our multifamily housing regulations, which is in Article 10 of the zoning regulations, you'll see that there's a whole calculation of how you get to the density of units per acre. And it's dependent on basically the developable land. You know, you have to separate out all of your steep slopes, your wetlands, your anything with that has utility right away or a conservation easement. And then you come to that, and then if you're in like the four corners, there's a base density of X units per acre, which I have not memorized yet. And so it goes from there, because multifamily housing is only allowed in our, what we call our PB zones, our planned business zones, so the four
Where
corners.
there's sewers.
Right, where we have,
Right.
and we've intentionally done that, we called them our smart growth areas, because we want to direct growth to
To
where
those
there
areas.
is infrastructure, not only water and sewer, but transportation, walkability, access to, shopping, healthcare, jobs. So, so that density bonus, that density
So that's already
calculation.
been mapped for the whole town.
Well, it's been mapped for the whole town, but then you have to do site specific, because you have to separate. So just because you have 50 acres and you get 8
Might be
units
slope
per acre,
Yeah.
you don't get 50 times 8. You have to then do your site specific analysis, and then you get your density from there. Now, we do offer other density bonuses outside of affordability, and those include things like if you have structured parking, like a parking garage, or other sustain, like if you're doing Energy Star, if you add a bus stop, so if you're doing other sustainability measures, or if you have, if you create offsite or I think on-site public amenities that not just open for the residents, but open to the public. So there's a
Okay.
whole area.
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, it's
We could
going
go on and on,
beyond-
But so
it's beyond
that's what plays into the density bonus.
Correct.
Gotcha.
Mike, what did you have?
I'm curious about the financing, so. How much does the town, I mean, in general, how much does the town do versus how much does the developer have to come up with? Or other sources?
You mean to build an affordable housing?
Yeah, I
Well,
mean, are there typical percentages of the 100% of the project?
well, what probably would be a
There's
good
all these
idea.
other sources too, right? There's like
So
state funds.
if you
and
look at
federal
what,
funds and-
that we have a live permitted application right now that's going to
Right.
break ground, Eagleville Green. And we have done, not from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, but we have provided them with just things to bring them over to the finish line. For example, upgrading their sewer infrastructure. But there, the town could never.
No,
this on it.
the town could not
Yeah.
afford out of its own funds to do this, but you know, what would be a good idea here at some point in the near future would be to have someone come and outline for us, what are the
Yeah.
sources of funding you really have to tap? Because there's tax credits, there's state grants,
I mean, just to
There's
see a
low interest
typical
loans,
project.
and usually you have to weave together multiple sources of funding, as
Right.
they did for the Eagleville Green, including Joe Courtney got them,
Yeah,
got them a set
poor
aside,
Joe,
amount.
good guy.
But without that, and especially in the last couple of years with costs going up, they couldn't have done this. I'm assuming they're gonna break ground.
Fairly soon.
Yeah,
I mean, we're paying for the sewer, we've sidewalk infrastructure, and then, we gave them, they're not paying taxes, they're gonna be doing a payment in lieu of taxes, similar to what Yukon does, so I believe they're gonna be getting a decent tax break also on,
but they also had to have some of their units be market rate, because otherwise they could not afford the cost.
So this is a negotiation in the application process?
Well,
Uh,
so remember, this is the first project we've done, and so we don't have an affordable housing trust fund, but we did have ARPA funds, and then we got a $4.7 million grant from the Department of Economic and DECD. So so we've been helping them in any way that we can.
Right,
So I was on their board just briefly, and it was clear they were right at the edge of being able to go forward with this project, but they were missing several $100,000.
right.
So if we'd had the trust fund at that time and no other sources of funding, they could have come to us. They had an approved project, they had all the financing in place, they had the whole plan in place, they had an architectural design. They could have, if we had this process, they could have come to say, we need X dollars, and this is why we need it to complete this. And because I think we should see the trust fund as a way to leverage other dollars, because
Right,
with the state, for example, the Department of Housing, if they know that you're able to leverage some other funds, if they're giving you a big grant, it's an incentive for them, to maybe to give you the grant. But
so the application has some financial plan. And we said they have to have some of the finances
well, they have to have the whole thing in place.
in place.
Yeah,
when
they would have to have the
apply.
whole project in place, but saying we're missing X, Y, and Z, or we're missing Z. And this is what we need to get you over the top. What we could do, at one of the next, I don't know which meeting, but Kylie Goslin, who's the executive director of the Partnership for Strong Communities in the state, where affordable housing is really their mission, was very happy to come. She was happy, she would have come tonight, but I said, but she didn't feel she was a trust fund expert. And so we can talk with Kylie and see who would be a good person to come here and sort of lay this out for us. What's involved in putting together an affordable housing project, and what's involved, particularly if you're looking at various levels of need.
And for that matter, I mean, you could have the housing authority come and they're right in the thick of it. And they've come, that we've worked closely with them, because there's been certain things like, for example, maybe they can describe this, but the building code has changed, right? So they got approved based on a building code that was 2 years old. Now, if they submit their zoning permit, they would have to go in and follow the new building code, which would they'd have to redesign the project basically. So they are going to the state for a waiver, but we've worked with them. We're trying to be creative on building permit fees, because the building permit fees for such a project are huge, but yet the town can't waive those because our building department still needs to go out and inspect it, and the tax. So there's a lot of things that go into this, and a lot of activity that's happened to bring this Eagleville Green project to almost to the finish line, and they're getting there.
Okay. All right, so Kylie,
All
continue.
right. All right, so. All right, so I just want to go over inclusionary zoning, just so everyone has the same definition. So inclusionary zoning is just any zoning regulation requirement or condition of the development that's imposed by an ordinance, regulation, or pursuant of any special permit, exception, or subdivision plan that promotes the development of affordable housing. So the ways that this can be applied are a few different ways. So you can either set aside a reasonable number of units for affordable housing through the deed restriction or through other means. You can also use the density bonuses that we mentioned prior. And you can also make payments into the Housing Trust Fund to be used for construction, rehabbing, or repairing any affordable housing in the town. So that last part about making the payments into a trust fund, so that can either be done in addition to the other ways, or it can be in lieu of the other ways that are mentioned. So lastly, we're just going to be going over the Housing Trust Fund statutes and how it relates to zoning regulations. So when it comes to Stanford states that those fee in lieu funds can only be used in accordance with state statute and also Sanford zoning regulations. So that includes construction, rehabbing, or repairing housing that's affordable to people of low or moderate income. And then with Fairfield, they've mentioned that certain applications are exempt from the zoning fees that were mentioned before. So that's any application that's submitted by a federal or state entity, also Town of Fairfield, Fairfield Board of Ed, the Housing Authority, or any of their agencies. So pretty much anything that's outside the government space isn't like exempt from the zoning fee. And any application that involves affordable housing that's approved through 830G that we've mentioned before in the prior meeting. Also, an application that involves the development of affordable housing with no less than 10% of the units. And any application that would be involving an accessory structure or a deck. With Mansfield, the way that we've done it is that the in lieu fee will be calculated and paid in its entirety through the zoning permit and prior to the recording of the subdivision map of the land records. And if the zoning permit expires without the construction rate of the housing units, then it's returned. And once again, the fees are paid into the Housing Trust Fund. And the Affordable Housing Plan is reviewed and approved through the Planning and Zoning Commission, who sets the standards for everything. So that's the information I had for everyone.
Thank you.
Kylie.
You're welcome.
So just, and I meant to send this, I sent it to you, Jennifer, but I don't know if you all had a chance to look back at Mansfield's affordable housing plan. Because I went through it and just in a one page of summarized what I could find actually of need that was referenced in the plan. And now, before I send it out, I'll have you go over this again, but because I think for us, it's one thing, yes, we could probably, working with Kylie, we could look at all of these applications, we could put together an application. But we have to have priorities. What are do we want to give priorities to certain kinds of projects? And how do we just, how do we determine need? So, for example, we know that 46% of the people in this town pay over 30% of their income for housing. But of that, half of those are people where the households are headed by someone 25 years of age or older. So it gives us an idea that those are family, or most likely family units, not student units. It would be good to see if we could find out from the social services department, or perhaps from experience at the senior center about, and I don't know other sources in town, about seniors who are facing difficulties with, not just making their mortgage payments, but heating expenses. Actually, Wayne might have some information about the number of people from Mansfield who come to them for heating assistance, or the access agency might. So that we just begin to get, what is the level of need that we're talking about? The housing authority, we know they have 135 people on their waiting list. This is just based on the town plan for Section 8 certificates. People, in other words, at 50% of the average median income. But when they opened their waiting list in 2018, there were 2,000 people on that. So that 135 is an artifact, because they just randomly selected 200 people from that waiting list, and now it's 135 people, but it's much higher. People with disabilities, we know that people who are very poor, and they might be working people, as many people who go to the shelter and the No Free Shelter in Willimantic do work. There's no way in the world they're going to live here. I have friends who have adult children with serious mental illnesses, and if they can't get a housing voucher, the parents often pay for them to find an apartment somewhere. So those are just some of the issues, and I'm not sure how we And I don't know what our urgency here is, Jennifer, in getting criteria for the Housing Trust Fund. I just think we need more information. I don't know what the rest of you think.
I think you gave us those statistics, those numbers the last time, because I didn't bring that information because I scribbled it down like because that's when my brain hit on it, needs to be like 28% more or something, right, for each category around low income to working to seniors, that the town already has kind of an idea of how many units within each of those demographics we would need to meet the current need.
I mean, we know how many units we have
Yeah.
and we know how many are affordable.
Yeah,
I don't know that we've broken it down. I'd have to really, I don't think.
I don't
we've-
think we
I don't
have.
know.
I don't think we've broken it down
when
of
we,
It's 6.6% of
our stock.
our stock is affordable housing.
I
Hold
guess
on.
that maybe it was the
I have the break-
statistics around how many would potentially need it.
Yes,
That's
yes,
what-
I believe we have that, but then again, it's a little confusing, but I like the fact that the head of household over 25,
Right,
it tells a story, right?
right. Right.
And that may be, yeah, that's one way to maybe sift through the student factor that maybe, I mean, obviously some students will need affordable housing, but many of those that are in that statistic are actually being funded by their parents. So that's not, I don't think we design our affordable housing for that, but so are you saying that we should, this committee maybe, or maybe is it something we could task Kylie with to pull out some of the goals in the affordable housing plan?
Well,
and
there's-
weave them into an
Yeah,
application?
yeah, I mean, I think. Well, I think for us, I think we, if we're gonna give. Do we want an application for the housing, do we have the money in the housing trust fund to go to anyone who might want to put up an affordable housing project? Let's say if for people at 80% of the average median income, or for workforce housing, 120%. Any housing that's gonna be built in this town, with any of the apartments that are coming up, that's the market that they're gonna use those affordable units for. But no one, except for the small development that the Mansfield Nonprofit Housing Development Corporation, nobody is looking at who the people, the 50% of the people, the 60% of median income. And those are usually, working families who are making minimum wage or not much more. So it's the issue is do we want to give priority to particular kinds of projects based upon the needs of our community?
So, I grew up in the open space preservation world. And when we're evaluating a property for acquisition, we have broad criteria so that we can be flexible. They're linked back to the plan of conservation and development. But it allows us some flexibility, because if you had someone coming in who was doing, like Bill Green, where 34 of the 42 are going to be affordable to people
At 50 and 60%.
at 50 and 60%, right?
Right.
That probably is going to be more, you'd want to fund that, I would think. That
Oh, yes.
right, but you'd want to have flexibility if someone is coming in with an innovative, some kind of form that we haven't seen. For example, a cottage style development that is middle housing, or a group of tiny homes, which you could almost call rolling hills, a group of a really functioning
Right,
community of
Yeah.
tiny homes, right? So
But it would have to be a functional community of tiny homes.
that it's affordable.
And that is aimed at a particular population and is deed restricted.
Correct.
Yeah, like 55 and older. or
They have to,
something like
in
that.
order, there is on our I think it's for a 40-year deed restriction. That's the same with Eagle Building.
Right.
I think they will have a 40-year deed restriction on affordability, I believe. And same with the standard, that it's not in perpetuity, it runs for 30 to 40 years.
So what do the rest of you think? I mean, in terms of criteria, we're talking about criteria for the developing criteria here for the use of the housing trust fund.
Yeah, I mean, I really like the idea of flexibility, but also being, I almost feel like we need to weight things, because then it gives us the ability, or gives a committee
Right.
the ability to, and also to encourage the development of, right, for that lowest income. I do want us to get away from using the word students, like, I don't, I think that's just like naming a
Yeah,
population.
you're right.
Yeah,
Like,
Thank
yeah.
you for bringing
It's
that
just
up.
like
Thank you
saying,
for bringing that up. Yeah.
it's just like, let's
You're
just not do
absolutely right.
that, like,
Yeah.
because working for, like, someone can graduate from high school and want to live here,
Right.
and then we're gonna be lobbing them out because they're
Yes, that
technically,
language is important, and I appreciate you
yeah.
correcting. You
Well, it's
yes,
just,
like,
I
no, think it's, yeah.
putting that hat on, and it's just worrisome, because I think we want the flexibility to be able to encourage development at every level. So I think how to weight that in a way, to encourage developers to be like, oh, this would be an incentive to actually have units that meet this demographic need.
Don't you do that through the financing somehow? So
Well, I think
You
we do
make-
it through our
can you
application.
connect priorities to developer profits? That seems hard. I mean,
Can you what, Michael?
Connect our priorities and we make our priorities more profitable for the developer. So, because they're gonna sit in their office and say,
Yeah,
let's figure out something to build in Mansfield that's gonna maximize our profit,
yeah.
right?
But there are a lot of nonprofit developers.
That's true.
There are a lot of nonprofit developers, a lot of very competent ones out there who are accustomed to putting together these different sources of funding. And if they thought this was a welcoming climate for them, they haven't come here. I mean, they're doing things in Willimantic, but we haven't really been that welcoming as a town until very recently. And if they thought we were welcoming, they might come and say, great, we'd like to get X number. We have a project, it's approved, gone to zoning, but we need this much to be able to finish it off.
Well, you might also find someone who has a house that they're currently doing for students that they might want to go through a process, because if they can get funding to change that property, and they could make more money down the road, like long term.
Is the
So-
trust fund, are you thinking of it as a yes, no, or is it like a scaled amount? So they bring you a project and you say, that's not really our priority. So the answer is no, you get zero. Or for this, what you're proposing, it's one of our medium priorities, so you get medium funding.
Well, that's how I guess we have to
That's
think
right.
about, how do we scale them? How do we develop a point system? I'm sure these other towns can help us with that, but it should be based upon, our criteria.
So some of the things that I think about especially in my new position is, so first of all, we want more affordable units, right? So that should be, they have to be restricted, they have to be affordable to 80, 60, whatever you decide. And probably if they're affordable to 60, then maybe it gets a higher, or 60 or lower gets a higher weight. I don't know. But one of the things that we're really dealing with is the need for redevelopment or renovation. Because if you look at, we have a lot of apartment complexes in our town, and we're going to get more. And so if you look at the Wrenwoods, the Carriage House, the Celerons, all the Oakwood, Maplewood, all those woods out there, they are in real need of repair. And if they could restrict those units and do some repair, or we could just buy them outright. Like, for example, White Oak condos, we've thought about buying a few of those and restricting those. And then we would, so things like that, like buying existing properties, working with the Wrenwoods and all of those to see if they would consider restricting, we could pay them to restrict
some of their units, which
Correct,
would,
yeah.
which would actually also then change the demographic, right,
Yeah.
of that area, because you
Yeah.
could say, here's what's needed, you know. That's a pretty cool concept. So so they would, you said two different things, because one is partnering with a developer. And the second would be the town buying it.
Yep.
And potentially,
Partnering with an existing owner of a multifamily complex. And then, or the town or
or with,
the housing authority, actually,
or with, yes, they're nonprofit. Yeah.
right, they're in a better position to manage housing. That's not what towns do
Right.
for business. We're not landlords, and I don't know that we want to get into that business unless we hire a whole slew of staff, which I don't know the taxpayers want to do.
Is it typical to use a point system in these? You mentioned point system.
Well, it may be. I mean, that's maybe something Kylie can find out how they actually determine when they, have these towns actually use a point system that they're weighting different criteria. But,
Because I think, can't you achieve both things, flexibility and some prioritization by putting a point system?
Yep.
The
Yes, right.
developers are gonna read these things and say, oh, let's, go for these points, but not these points. But in going after points, they have to be creative, right? And it will, of course, it depends on how the points are written.
okay.
What do you think? Will?
If I'm not mistaken, that is how, I think it's Stanford. I think that's how Stanford does it, is that they weigh the pros and cons between different developers who are looking to apply to the area. And whoever has a more cohesive plan, they get it. It's either Stanford or Fairfield. But I remember reading that one of them decides between them based on who has the better application.
So it might be good if we read those and then try to answer the question about.
Read the applications and yes. And Kylie's gonna send us. But I would, well, I'll work with, if you would like me to do that, I'll work with Jennifer and Kylie. As I said, I tried to summarize what I could gather out of the affordable housing plan, as well as what the Partnership of Strong Communities did, their profile of every town, every town's affordable housing. And just summarize, well, how many units do we have? Where are they? I mean, I already did that. I've got it in there. What are the needs that we know of right now? And we can ask social services.
And we do
Yes.
have Dorothy
And
Gillespie,
Yeah.
who is so you've been corresponding with Sandy Ferran, but Dorothy is actually going to be your a key staff person, and Dorothy is our new, well, since April, she was newly promoted to our community assistance coordinator, and she's involved. Her office is at Human Services. She's working with all sorts of different types of populations. And she is our certified grant administrator for the Community Development Block Grant. And they have different priorities all the time about what they're, what they'll fund in terms of rehab. And she also runs our housing rehab program, which provides loans for rehabilitation. So,
Well, you had mentioned Desegregate Connecticut.
yes.
Like I do want, because they're doing some pretty innovative
Right.
thinking across the state, but I wonder if it would be helpful to hear from them kind of, because I think that's the link between zoning and us, right? Like seeing where there might be some barriers or tension points. I don't know if it'd be helpful to.
Yeah, and I have met with their executive director because I presented on a panel that Kathy Dorgan, who's the architect for the Eaglewood Green, she invited me to speak about Mansfield affordable housing, and we had a sidebar, and I would love for him to come to Mansfield because desegregate to me is fantastic, but I feel that it's very focused in on urban areas, and their models, for example, what they propose for their ADUs and for they've got this whole live, work, ride initiative. It feels very much like it may not fit for a Mansfield. It feels like it fit for
Yeah, they're looking like the transit corridors in
Yeah,
Hartford and West Hartford
Right.
and putting housing right.
right,
Right.
and
Yeah.
incentivizing multifamily housing, and so I did say, let's continue, and he was very encouraged about what Mansfield was doing. And he was also kind of shocked about the volume of development that we have going on here. So he was like, yeah, so I would like to have a conversation with him, and I encourage you, there is a live, work, ride webinar next Friday that I'll send that out to you. Are you on there?
Yeah, I
Yes, sir.
am,
Yeah.
yeah. But I didn't think it was as relevant to us, so I didn't sign up for it.
Yeah,
So can I make a suggestion, maybe at the next meeting, building on some of the things we've been talking about? We can look at just an overview of what we have. I mean, that's gonna be pretty easy to do. Information we already have on needs. I can ask Wayne and Dorothy, perhaps as a work with Dorothy on this.
Yep.
Okay. And maybe have the Housing Authority, Eagleville Green, you know, who would be a great with Rebecca Fields, but is their architect,
Kathy, yeah.
Kathy, who's terrific. She works a lot with affordable housing. She's overseen this whole project right from the beginning, or their consultant too, is
Yeah.
who can come in and say, this is, well, first of all, they can talk to us, the Housing Authority can talk to us about the needs that they're facing and the demands that they have, because they have both multifamily and senior housing. And they can talk to us about what were the sources of funding that they had to gather just to build these, you know, just to get this 42 unit off the ground. So that we have some understanding of scope. Is that, we're picking up?
Yeah,
Sorry?
that would be good. Yeah, get her over here. Yeah,
What do you think?
I think that's good. I think there's another thing that Kylie and I have discussed that we need to enact an administrative fee by that we need to find examples of administrative fees that the town council can enact. Because while we have this fee in lieu, that now we're going to have to manage these units. And so in our zoning regulations, we can charge an administrative fee on top of this fee in lieu. And so I think it's really important to look at
Yeah.
what other communities have
That would
done
be
there
great.
yes. I like
and
that.
quickly get that in
So like
effect.
a yearly fee because they get inspected, is that?
I'm not sure. I think it would be a one-time. I'm not sure how it works, actually. I need to help. I need help finding out what other towns have done.
Yeah.
It could be yearly. It could be they already pay a yearly fee. Any rental pays a yearly fee to get or they have a biannual inspection from the building department. So I think this is a one-time fee.
Yeah,
that
you just,
they
I guess
pay
I'd
in.
want to be careful not to over fee because of that.
Yes,
they're already
and
getting one.
that's why that's why these fees are, we have to see what makes sense.
Don't they already pay the department, the building department
Yeah.
for inspections?
Yes,
Yes.
yep.
Mm.
So we have to see, what makes sense,
Yeah.
and we had left that blank on purpose because we needed to get these regulations enacted, and we didn't. I believe Linda Painter, my predecessor, didn't have time to kind of do that full research. Yeah.
And sort of in line with that, Jennifer had mentioned at another time that, okay, let's say the Haven development, which was the Haven. is that what it's called?
They've now called the
Standard, okay, so they're approved and they're gonna do, 35 units of 80% of the median income and then 5 units of workforce housing?
Yeah.
Something like
Yeah.
that. Well, how do we know they're really doing that? So we have to have a
To make sure that,
process
right,
that they're actually renting.
we're
to people.
monitoring that.
Yes, and that we monitor it
Yeah.
because,
And does the housing authority monitor that? Would it fall
Well,
underneath that
No.
or
No.
building? So would it fall
No.
under
No.
building?
So we'd have to-
It's yet to be determined.
Oh, who does
So-
it?
Right, and that's what that administrative fee would cover, is the monitoring of affordability. So the building department is now they'll say, is it safe? They're looking at baseline because they were finding that the students were being taken advantage of by a lot of landlords by living in blighted apartments. And so they wanted to make sure that at least basic health and safety was being taken care of. So that's for any rental, not just an affordable rental. And it not to single out students, but the majority.
I'm like, well, that's one narrative.
Yeah.
Another narrative is that people wanted to put restrictions on landlords so that it makes it and harder to have units. So that, I mean, there's two ways to look at that.
There's
two,
two ways to look at everything, right?
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, so I guess, that's an interesting dynamic because it does typically fall under inspections, but in this case, that department wouldn't necessarily.
No.
They're not looking at
For,
income.
they're not,
Yeah.
they're not verifying incomes.
Yeah,
The other issue is the Housing Trust Fund ordinance, the town's ordinance. Does not, it says the town can charge the trust fund for their administrative costs, but there's no limit. And my suggestion is we might want to think that there should be some limit in terms of percentage that can be charged to the fund.
Yeah, and I think that could be like a general policy statement too, that I think right now, the feeling of the council is that the more money that can be used to get more affordable units. But, it could eventually, if we see that being abused, then a modification to the ordinance would be.
Well, I think you think about it.
Maybe for long term.
And
yeah.
that might be another question about these other towns, Kylie, is. Do they look at the fund for any of the town's administrative cost of administering the
Yeah.
trust fund?
because that can become cumbersome if you also have multiple departments having to touch one project or. Right, and the cross check
Well,
of it.
they do. They do.
No, but I'm
there
just
are
saying on a
multiple
regular
departments.
basis, it just becomes cumbersome for kind of both parties. Like it'd be more administratively burdensome to the town is what you might have two people doing different things for the same thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I just don't want to see the trust fund money personally.
yeah, go to the town to,
No, I don't want to see
Downtown,
it go to the
yeah.
town either. no.
to pay for a person just to verify that somebody's.
right,
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
Okay.
so what department right now, there's like tenants have to verify to get like rental support? Like because of COVID and things like that?
I'm pointing at Dorothy. And that would be, she's done some of the work.
Where does
on
she fall
that.
underneath? What department?
So she's human services. Yeah, so there are, and then there's. I'm
Sorry, Jen, did you want me to talk on that for a moment or no?
yes, please.
So I believe this answers the question. So the town council awarded or approved ARPA funds to be used for the RARE program, which was to help residents with some back rental assistance. I believe that's the question that was asked. And so we have that particular amount of money. We can, I believe it was $150,000, and I can double check that, but the premise was that we could assist 100 families and have a $1,500 cap with that program. And to my knowledge, I believe we are around I want to say 20 families at the moment that have taken advantage of that program. Again, that's kind of just off the top of my head. I can provide the committee with a more solid number when I go back and do some research, because I wasn't really prepared to provide numbers tonight.
That does show how like the town has like monitored something.
But
Yeah.
so Dorothy, also, the state had rental assistance, I think that was federally provided. That was either WAME, I think WAME was administering that. There was an application process, or maybe it was Access Agency, I don't know, but it was money that had to be spent.
Yeah, it was that.
It was Access Agent, had to be spent fairly quickly.
So
And I don't know, again, if they kept track of if people from Mansfield and.
I think they did. I mean, from my knowledge of people that used it.
they
That they-
determined who from Mansfield, who from wherever their service towns are. Okay,
Also to to that point, I know that there was also, I'm sorry, I just lost it. There was also money, that came down. I know that it was spent, but then there was also another set of money that came down that was, given again once they ran out of the funds. That's happened in the past as well.
Yeah, and that's all gone, and the eviction moratorium is all gone, and,
Yes.
yeah, so maybe I could talk, Dorothy, maybe you and I could talk and look at some of these sources that we could just gather some of that information.
Dorothy's gonna be straight out until January 15th.
Oh,
When
okay.
she has her 3 big reports due.
All right, that's okay. Well, I'll just.
And
write
2 reimbursements.
January 16th to the end of the month, I'm out of state anyhow. So. Okay. All right, so a lot of information. What are we doing here? Is there anything else? We have our schedule of meetings. I'm sorry, by the way, that I didn't mean to send you all that. I looked to see why that happened, and I just finally figured it out, that it was my Google or my Apple calendar was picking up from the email, the group, and I had to go back into the calendar and get rid of everybody's name because it started doing it again. And I said,
I
should
was
we extend?
wondering what
I was
it
just like, oh,
Yeah,
I guess I'll.
oh.
accept it.
No,
And I said,
I really,
December meeting.
I'm sorry,
Hey,
I really,
don't
I
worry
now
about
I
it.
figured out.
Yeah, just-
I had to call it the meeting a strange name so that it didn't, and then I went and got rid of all the people's names.
Technology, great.
No, it isn't.
So this is the schedule, and so, this was in your packet, the schedule of meetings coming up.
It says 2020. I saw that, the typo.
So that'd be 2023.
Change that to 2023.
2023 meetings.
Right, but then it says, oh,
It's when we adopted it.
then we didn't
You
make
are.
that.
That's when we adopted it. Yeah, we
We're on
did,
top of things.
we did too.
Okay, so we have a priorities for next
Where's the
meeting.
money going now? So we have 1.7, is it in a special account?
Yeah.
And it's earning interest?
I believe it's earning interest, but it's in a special account that named the Affordable Housing Trust Fund.
I hope the town is getting 3-month US Treasury. bills.
That's the only thing with any.
Thank you very much.
I know.
Okay, any other business that anybody wants to bring up? Lots of,
Just, they had one thing on your agenda, just the update on the Mansfield Affordable Housing Regulations, and I did,
okay.
I did refer to that, but our consultant is working with us to develop a draft, and that will be referred out to this committee.
Okay.
And then I did want to just mention, so part of when we're a committee, and we are not supposed to be talking amongst ourselves, otherwise it is an illegal meeting. So I always have to remind committee members of that, because everything we do is subject to the Freedom of Information Act. So I always say, don't reply all. And I'm happy to.
Oh, yeah.
I'm happy to send out
That's a good reminder.
any information to the group and convey any information, but that's just,
Yeah.
otherwise we might get our hands slapped.
So for the next meeting, do you think you'll have the affordable housing regulations before? And will you post, are things then put into that file thing you showed us? Because I don't remember where that was. That was my fault.
The file, meaning.
You had an electronic folder. You said, I'm saving everything in here for us.
Oh, that was gonna go on the website. No, you will get a specific memo that says,
Okay.
please respond by when the public hearing is.
Whatever we need to see will be posted there. We'll get an
Absolutely,
email.
100%. Yep.
Yeah, so next meeting, we're gonna quickly try to do some needs assessment information and see if we can have housing authority / Mansfield nonprofit come and talk to us about needs they've identified, housing authority, and perhaps the architect or their consultant talk about, what do you have to do to put together an affordable housing project?
I'm wondering, that may be a lot if you're reviewing the regulations, so I would maybe.
Oh, okay, so you
be-
think you might have the
We
regulations?
may, yeah, and,
Okay,
because I really
So this
want you
might
to have
be the
adequate
March
time.
meeting. Okay,
And also Kylie and Sheila, if we can look at that administrative fee, because given the applications coming in, if we can get that enacted, if we want to do that, but ultimately the council will decide on whether to enact that, but they're gonna look to you for a recommendation.
okay.
Application fee, yeah, absolutely.
Did we, I know you just said hearing from the housing authority, but would it be appropriate to hear from human services,
At some point, yeah.
right? To,
Yes,
about what
absolutely.
they see, because
Yeah.
I would assume
Absolutely.
she has the statistics around the population and what they're projecting
Yeah,
for the town.
yeah.
So I don't know if like that goes hand in hand with the.
Well, but what
housing.
Dorothy is, yes, Dorothy's with Human Services, so.
Yeah, so I don't know if we
Right.
want to see that and housing kind of together, because that.
At some point, yeah, I
be
think
the
we
big
should, and
picture.
that's something that we can. I
Or
mean,
maybe Kylie could pull together.
Kylie's here to help with research, and maybe she could meet with Dorothy and pull
Uh-huh.
together like another, it'd be great, because we're only gonna have Kylie till May. So if we could get her to do as much research as possible for the committee, that would be great. So.
Oh, I'll be happy to do it after that. I don't care.
Yeah.
We just need to find you affordable housing so you can stay here.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah,
Well, maybe that's a good thing if you do have time this month, Kylie, if everyone agrees, like to work with human services and get that information so we can
Right.
review it. Especially if we have other speakers coming or.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah,
review it
yeah, I will
before.
work with them too, because I said I started to do the outline and I'll just send that along to them.
great,
Okay,
good.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you, everyone who,
Thank you.
Thank you.
just real quickly,
Thanks, Kylie.
folks like being in the room. We're still
Yeah.
going to.
I do.
Yes.
I do.
I do, yeah.
Are we doing a motion to adjourn?
Oh,
Oh, yes, thank you, Dorothy. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Sure.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, well,
Motion to
yeah,
adjourn,
I'm
okay.
all for
I
adjournment.
don't think it needs a second. All those in favor?
I.
Aye, okay, opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
So we'll.
Bye, everyone.
Both formats though, right? So
Yeah.
if we don't feel
Yeah.
well or, great.
awesome.